Do you know the origin of Xiao Yan's Fen Jue? Unexpectedly, it actually drifted down from the Great Thousand World. If you enjoy my way of explaining and storytelling, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really motivates me to keep creating. Continuing from the previous chapter, when they saw the strange flames burning upon the body of the Flame Emperor, the battlefield seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. The fire was unlike any heavenly flame they had ever witnessed. It did not blaze wildly, nor did it radiate violent heat. Instead, it burned in eerie silence, deep, ancient, and resolute, like the final light of a dying star. A cry of shock burst from Yan Yao's mouth, his pupils shrinking violently. He's actually self-igniting his sovereign body. The words had barely left his lips when the Flame Emperor's massive sovereign body trembled, then detonated from within. There was no ordinary explosion. The blazing figure did not shatter into chaotic fragments. Instead, it unraveled into an immeasurable net of fire stretching across the heavens like a burning firmament. Endless strands of flame interwove and expanded outward, forming a colossal web that sealed off the descending Divine Soul impact completely. The Divine Soul attack, vast, crushing, and filled with annihilating intent, crashed into the fire net. For an instant, heaven and earth seemed to lose their sound. Then, the Divine Soul power began to melt. It did not resist. It did not explode. It simply dissolved as though thrown into an abyss of absolute incineration. Layer by layer, the terrifying impact was devoured, purified, and erased from existence. In the next breath, it was gone, burned into absolute nothingness. The fire net gradually dimmed. The once majestic Flame Emperor's body had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a faint, dim white flame suspended in mid-air, fragile, flickering, yet stubbornly alive. High above in the fractured heavens, the 9 streaks of starlight had already collided with the pitch-black giant face that loomed like a nightmare. But there was no earth-shattering explosion, no thunderous shockwave. Instead, space itself began to collapse. Layer upon layer of void folded inward, devouring light matter and sound alike. The giant black face twisted violently as it was dragged into the collapsing dimensional rift. It sank. It was swallowed whole. The true body of the heavenly god art was utterly destroyed. As its caster, Yan Yao's body shook violently. A mouthful of blood surged up his throat, barely suppressed. His enormous heaven-connecting python true form flickered, then vanished entirely. The colossal serpent that once coiled across the sky was gone. In its place stood Yan Yao in human form, pale-faced, his breathing ragged. In that instant, his aura plummeted like a falling star. The overwhelming presence that once dominated the battlefield was reduced to something thin and unstable, like a candle flame on the verge of extinction. Ha! Ha! A low, hoarse chuckle escaped his lips. Despite the blood at the corner of his mouth and the tremor in his limbs, his eyes gleamed with cold triumph. In the end, wasn't it still me who won? His gaze slowly shifted toward the distance. There lay Xiao Yan, motionless, unconscious, his body riddled with exhaustion and the remnants of destructive power. He looked as though a single breeze could scatter him like dust. Yan Yo raised his trembling palm. From the center of his hand, a gray flame flickered into existence. It was not brilliant like golden fire, nor majestic like crimson infernos. It was dim, ashen, suffocating like the remnant embers of a world reduced to ashes. Yet within that grey flame lay terrifying destructive force. The flame swelled rapidly. In the span of a breath, it expanded into a colossal fire dragon, tens of thousands of feet long. Its scales were formed of condensed grey fire, each one pulsing with annihilating heat. Its eyes burned with cold brutality. The dragon let out a deafening roar that shook the heavens. With a violent sweep of its massive body, it tore through the air, space splitting apart in its wake as it charged straight toward the defenseless Xiao Yan. The grey dragon roared again, its maw wide-open fangs forged from destruction itself, and it descended like judgment. However, just as the colossal grey fire dragon was only a few thousand feet away from Xiao Yan, its blazing maw already casting a shadow of death over his unconscious body. The world changed. From beyond the distant horizon, far past the limits of sight and perception, a terrifying power surged forth. It did not roar. It did not blaze. It simply descended. A force capable of controlling heaven and earth itself crossed millions of miles in an instant, sweeping across the skies like an invisible tide. Mountains trembled. Seas fell silent. Even the fragmented space above seemed to bow in submission. In merely a breath, that supreme controlling force enveloped the entire nameless continent. The chaotic battlefield stopped. The raging spiritual storms stilled. The grey fire dragon mid-roar froze in the sky as though captured within a painting. The originally devastated land, filled with collapsing void and violent aftershocks, fell into absolute silence. All things were frozen. Space no longer flowed. Energy no longer surged. Even dust suspended in the air ceased its descent. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Then, a voice resounded. It was ancient, vast, deep beyond comprehension. It felt as though it had traveled across 10,000 years, carrying the weight of forgotten eras and fallen dynasties. The Taigu divine clans are actually fighting amongst themselves like this. Shameful. The voice rolled across heaven and earth like boundless thunder, yet it carried no anger, only disappointment. Heavy and dignified, its echo stretched across millions of miles. Mountains, rivers, clouds, and skies all trembled beneath its resonance. In that single instant, whether space matter, spiritual energy, or even the remnants of divine techniques, everything was completely sealed. The four great battle zones that had split the heavens apart were directly locked in place. Terrifying shockwaves, powerful enough to annihilate entire regions, hung frozen mid-eruption, like sculpted ripples in a crystal sea. However, two of the battle zones trembled. The restraint lasted only briefly. A cracking sound echoed through the frozen void. Space fractured like glass. With a violent shatter, four figures broke free from the spatial confinement, their auras surging outward as they forced apart the invisible suppression. They were Wu Wanlong and Mu Hengtian, as well as Jia Tianxing and Zhuang Yuanzi. As heavenly supremes, their power stood near the peak of this world. Though the descending force was overwhelming, they possessed enough strength to tear open a sliver of freedom. Their robes fluttered violently as they stabilized themselves, mid-air faces pale and eyes filled with disbelief. However, He Yunyun and Yan Yao were not so fortunate. Their bodies remained completely immobilized. Yan Yao's expression twisted in shock, his grey flame frozen at his palm. He Yuanyun's pupils shrank violently, yet he could not move even a single finger. The suppression pressing down upon them was absolute. It was not mere spiritual pressure. It was dominion. This power. Wu Wanlong's voice trembled slightly. His gaze slowly lifted toward the distant heavens. Who exactly is it? Who could with a single thought freeze space across millions of miles? Who could silence heavenly supremes and paralyze divine techniques as if they were trivial sparks? At that moment, for the first time since the battle began, true fear appeared in the eyes of the strongest experts present. At this moment, Wu Wanlong and the others stared toward the distant horizon, their hearts pounding violently. They were heavenly supremes' existences who stood at the summit of countless continents, beings who could overturn seas and shatter mountains with a single gesture. Yet now, under this unseen pressure, even breathing felt heavy. They wanted to know, what kind of heaven-reaching expert could wield such absolute dominion over heaven and earth? What kind of existence could freeze millions of miles of space with nothing but a thought? As their gazes remained fixed upon the farthest edge of the sky, a low humming sound gradually spread through the frozen world. It was subtle at first. Then it grew clearer. The sound did not seem to originate from any single direction. Rather, it resonated directly within the fabric of space itself, as though heaven and earth were vibrating in reverence. Then, without wind, without fluctuation, a figure appeared in the sky. No one saw him arrive. No spatial ripple. No descending beam of light. No thunderous entrance. He was simply there, A half-illusory, half-solid silhouette stood above the heavens as if he had existed there since ancient times. The moment he appeared, an overwhelming, controlling aura spread outward. It was not oppressive in the usual sense. It was sovereign. The sky dimmed slightly. The air seemed to lower its head. Even the chaotic remnants of spiritual power drifting through the void grew obedient and still. Heaven and earth seemed to submit. Wu Wanlong and Mu Hengtian's expressions changed drastically. Cold sweat formed on their backs. This kind of power clearly surpassed beings like them who were still lingering at the early stage of Heavenly Supreme. This was not merely a slight difference in cultivation. It was a gulf, an existence infinitely close to the late stage of Heavenly Supreme, perhaps only half a step away from standing among the true giants of the Great Thousand World. A super expert of the Taigu divine clan, of the ancient heaven-connecting Python lineage. That was their first instinctive thought. Such bloodline pressure, such ancient aura, such terrifying control over heaven and earth. It could only belong to that legendary lineage. Before this ancient being, everyone on the nameless continent, no matter how powerful, was merely a junior. Wu Wanlong was the first to react. Suppressing the turmoil in his heart, he stepped forward, knelt in mid-air, and cupped his fists respectfully. Junior Wu Wanlong, from a lower plane currently serving as Great Elder of the Western Heaven Hall, greets Senior. His voice was steady, but the respect within it was unmistakable. Moments later, Tianxing hurriedly followed. Her proud demeanor from earlier had completely vanished. She lowered herself gracefully and knelt. This junior Tianxing, current Palace Master of the Myriad Phenomena, Heavenly Palace. We were unaware of the Divine Clan Venerable's descent and failed to welcome you from afar. We ask Senior's forgiveness. Mu Hengtian and Zhuang Yuanzi exchanged a brief glance. Then without hesitation, they too prostrated themselves. Before such an existence, pride was meaningless. Heh. A faint chuckle echoed from the sky. The half-illusory figure looked down at Wu Wanlong, his gaze calm yet penetrating, as though seeing through the latter's entire being. The Western Heaven Hall. I once met your Hallmaster of Water Origin. His tone was casual, as if speaking of an old acquaintance. No need for such courtesy. Though the words were gentle, none dared rise without permission. His gaze then shifted towards Tianxing. Myriad Phenomena, Heavenly Palace. Is it Xiao Yan's Myriad Phenomena, Heavenly Palace? Tianxing's heart trembled slightly. She immediately replied with utmost respect. Ancestor Xiao Yan was indeed one of the past palace masters of our Myriad Phenomena, Heavenly Palace. The ancient figure gave a faint nod. Haha. Rise. Palace Master Xiao Yan had some dealings with me in the past. His words carried the weight of time. To him, the ancestors they revered were merely figures he had once known personally. Wu Wanlong and Tianxing slowly rose, though their heads remained lowered. Then the ancient figure's gaze shifted once more. It fell upon Mu Hengtian and Zhuang Yuanzi. His eyes were not sharp. Yet under that gaze, both men felt as though their very souls were laid bare. And you two, what are your identities? Mu Hengtian immediately cupped his fists. Junior Mu Hengtian sect master of the ancient heaven and earth gate. Zhuang Yuanzi followed closely. This one is Zhuang Yuanzi Palace Master of Xianxia Palace. The sky remained silent for a brief moment. Only the boundless, suffocating aura of dominion lingered in the air, as though the ancient being was measuring them. The sky remained heavy with silence. The ancient figure's gaze swept across the kneeling experts below. Though his expression was calm, the pressure radiating from him felt like an invisible mountain pressing against their souls. Hearing their introductions, the half-illusory figure finally spoke again, his voice steady and deep. Which of you can tell me what exactly happened? The question was simple, yet under his gaze it felt like a trial. Mu Hengtian and Zhuang Yuanzi stiffened. For a brief moment, neither of them knew how to respond. The earlier chaos, the scheming, the shifting alliances, all of it seemed trivial before this ancient being. Any falsehood would likely be seen through instantly. Before they could carefully choose their words, Tianxing suddenly spoke, her voice clear and resolute. Senior, this Zhuang Yuanzi coveted a trace of Taigu divine bloodline. He intended to seize it in order to fulfill Shengsu Palace's ambition of dominating the central continent. Her words cut cleanly through the air. Zhuang Yuanzi's expression darkened slightly, but he did not dare interrupt. The illusory figure's gaze narrowed ever so slightly. The surrounding space trembled faintly, as if responding to his subtle shift in mood. Is this true? The question was not loud, but it carried undeniable authority. Zhuang Yuanzi drew a slow breath, forcing himself to remain composed. Senior, he said respectfully, it would be difficult to determine the truth based on one person's words alone. He paused, then continued carefully. It would be better to allow the fourth Saint Sun to come forward and explain personally. We were merely acting under the fourth Saint Sun's instructions. The moment the words fourth Saint Sun were spoken, the atmosphere subtly changed. The ancient figure did not immediately respond. Instead, he fell silent as though weighing something. A brief moment later, he gave a faint nod. With a simple gesture, he raised one finger and lightly pointed downward. The frozen space around Tong Dan and He Yuan Yun began to ripple. The invisible restraints binding them loosened gradually like chains dissolving into mist. However, within the distorted space, it was Tong Dan who was released. He Yuan Yun remained firmly suppressed. The difference was deliberate. The distinction was clear. As soon as he regained freedom, Tong Dan lifted his head. His gaze shot toward the distant sky. The moment he saw the half-illusory figure standing above the heavens, his expression changed instantly. Shock, relief, and overwhelming joy. Without hesitation, he transformed into a streak of light and rushed upward, arriving beside the ancient figure in a single breath. Grand Elder, you finally arrived. His voice carried excitement that he could no longer conceal. To the others, the figure in the sky appeared hazy, half real, half illusory, as though formed from condensed spiritual energy. But in Tong Dan's eyes, the image was completely clear. It was simply an old man, an extremely plain-looking old man dressed in simple robes, with calm eyes that seemed to have witnessed countless eras. The old man smiled faintly. "You little brat," he said, his tone not stern, but mildly reproachful. "You actually sneaked out of the clan. If I hadn't sensed the disturbance in your divine soul imprint, I wouldn't have known something had happened to you." Tong Dan lowered his head slightly, but urgency flashed across his face. Grand Elder, it was Saint Sun Tong Dan who joined forces. Before he could finish, the old man gently waved his hand. The gesture was light, yet it silenced everything. I already guessed as much. His gaze shifted, slightly calm yet meaningful. "I will seek an explanation from Elder Tianxing." The name carried weight, Elder Tianxing. Within the ancient heaven-connecting Python clan, his position stood second only to the Grand Elder himself, a pillar of authority, a figure whose stance could sway the balance of the entire clan. And more importantly, he stood on Tong Dan's faction. The calm words of the Grand Elder caused subtle ripples in the hearts of those below. This matter was no longer merely a struggle over divine blood. It had risen to the level of internal conflict within one of the most ancient divine clans of the Great Thousand World. However, Elder Tianxing stood firmly on Tong Dan's faction. After speaking, the Grand Elder slowly shifted his gaze toward another region of the sky. His eyes, though calm, seemed capable of piercing through layers of space. "And since you are here as well, Elder Tianxing," he said evenly, "shall we settle this matter now, or return to the clan first?" The moment his words fell, the atmosphere tightened once more. Everyone's hearts trembled. So, there was another supreme expert hidden here all along. Almost instinctively, Wu Wanlong Xia Tianqing, and the others turned their eyes toward the direction the Grand Elder was staring at. In the distant void, space rippled slightly. Then, as if emerging from the folds of reality itself, several black-robed figures appeared, standing silently in mid-air. They had clearly been present for some time, watching, waiting. Elder Tianxing. He Yuan Yun's pupils shrank violently. He had not expected Elder Tianxing to descend personally. The situation had grown far beyond what he had imagined. Among the black-robed figures, one stepped slightly forward. His face was stern, his aura deep and restrained. Though he did not deliberately release his pressure, the surrounding space subtly distorted around him. He was Elder Tianxing, the second most powerful existence within the ancient heaven-connecting Python clan. He glanced at the Grand Elder briefly, then let out a quiet breath. Forget it. His voice was firm. Now that the bloodlines within the Taigu divine clan are increasingly scarce, outstanding disciples are extremely precious. He paused slightly before continuing. Tong Dan's coveting of the Taigu divine blood this time will not be pursued. A murmur stirred faintly among the watching experts. Not pursued. Such a dangerous internal struggle simply brushed aside. Elder Tianxing's tone remained calm. After all, such a heaven and earth divine bloodline is not meant for any one individual. The capable shall obtain it. With those words, he raised his sleeve and waved it lightly. Instantly, the invisible restraints that had sealed heaven and earth dissolved like melting ice. Space resumed its flow. Energy surged once more. The frozen shockwaves crashed forward in delayed eruptions before dissipating harmlessly under the two elders' presence. Tong Dan fully regained his freedom. At the same time, the restraints around Yan Yao and Xiao Yan also vanished. The enormous grey fire dragon, previously frozen mid-roar, resumed its motion with violent fury. It tore through the sky once more, its massive body twisting as it lunged toward the unconscious Xiao Yan. The killing intent was absolute. But at that very moment, a spatial fault suddenly descended. It was not a violent tear, nor a chaotic collapse. It was a clean, precise fracture, like a blade slicing through fabric. The space directly before Xiao Yan split open in a narrow vertical crack. The charging grey fire dragon collided with that fault and shattered. Its colossal body disintegrated into scattered flames, reduced to nothing in an instant. Wu Wanlong's eyes widened slightly. This aura, his voice trembled faintly. Could it be a shackles breaker? Mu Hengtian's expression turned grave. To reach Earth Supreme at such an age, their gazes shifted toward the Grand Elder. It was clear who had intervened. The Grand Elder smiled faintly, his expression calm. However, his eyes soon flickered with surprise. After the fire dragon was shattered, the residual grey flame did not dissipate. Instead, it was guided by a mysterious subtle force. The scattered flame threads twisted gently in the air, then slowly flowed toward Xiao Yan's body. Like rivers returning to the sea, they were absorbed. Completely. The Grand Elder's eyes narrowed slightly. This aura, he focused his perception carefully. Then a hint of astonishment appeared in his gaze. Isn't this the flame scripture of the Flame Spirit clan? How does he possess the Flame Spirit clan's clan-defending cultivation method? The Flame Spirit clan, a colossal existence within the Great Thousand World. Their core cultivation art was never passed to outsiders. Unless, the Grand Elder's expression grew contemplative. Could it be related to the world-destroying war 100,000 years ago? That war, even someone of his status remembered it clearly. Its scale had been unprecedented. It swept across the entire Great Thousand World. Heavenly supremes fell like rain. Ancient clans collapsed. Even countless lower planes were dragged into the conflict. Because of that catastrophic war, many supreme divine arts, divine techniques, and divine artifacts had been scattered across realms lost to history. Could it be that even the Flame Spirit clan's clan-defending technique had drifted down to a lower plane during that chaos? Moreover, it was said that the Flame Scripture was connected to a super-supreme Dharma body, a power capable of rivaling the most terrifying sovereign bodies in existence. The Grand Elder looked at the unconscious Xiao Yan, his gaze now no longer indifferent. This is truly interesting. He chuckled softly. With a light wave of his sleeve, an invisible profound force flowed outward and gently poured into Xiao Yan's body. It did not clash. It did not overwhelm. It harmonized. Under the nourishment of that ancient power, Xiao Yan's extremely weakened aura began to recover at a visible speed. His chaotic spiritual energy stabilized. His damaged meridians slowly repaired. The dim white flame within him flickered more steadily. However, though his condition improved rapidly, exhaustion still weighed heavily upon him. The battle had drained him beyond his limits. Even with the Grand Elder's intervention, he would still need time before opening his eyes again. That's all for today's content. See you in the next part. Support me by becoming a member. It will give me more motivation. Thank you so much.